So today we'll be talking about React components. First, we will create a React app, but before that, we have to install Node.js and text editor, code editor. We will be choosing VS Code, as many people do nowadays. After installing these two, we will confirm that we have them. Then we will talk about how to create a React apps through CRI or create React app library. And we will then talk about how React structure once again is in create React app. We will clean up our application from unnecessary code, and then we will talk about components. We will talk about how to import and export a component, how to render a component on each other, how to do default or named exports, and how to do CSS once again. So this is more like maybe for some of you it's more like a repetition, but for others it's really a reinforcement of what we've learned, and this is how it's done in the real world when you create a React app. To work with React on your local computer, whether it's Windows or Mac, you need to have Node.js, and to have Node.js we need to install it on nodejs.org. So as you see here, like if we zoom, I have Windows right now, but for Mac's the same process. What you do is latest, like this is the latest stable version, and the 16 has some latest features, but it might not be as stable as could be. So always like download this latest like standard or stable version unless you need those features. What you do is really just running this, whether you are on Mac or Windows, doing let's run it, and what you do is really just next. Of course, I don't need to install it, and to install it might take a few minutes, but after all, what you need is to check whether you have it or not. On Mac, to check it on Mac, you open terminal, or on Windows, you check CMD, and here on this screen, we say node-v, and we see if we have the latest version, latest stable version. Another way to check is to write node-version. We again see the same thing. Also check npm-v. This is not package manager. Now it is in 7.6. It could be higher when you checked, but this manages to create React app. This can like install Node package on your computer. So that's very important as well. And if you had any errors during installing this, let me know so we can solve it. To install VS Code, we just come here and write VS Code in Google. The first result should be Visual Studio Code, or you can go to code.visualstudio.com. You can download it install it on Mac OS, Windows, or Linux. I have Windows. I've already installed it, but you just click here and just pretty much do next, then you will see the system is installed on your computer. The IDE is installed on your computer. After installing Node.js and VS Code, what you do is you start opening VS Code. It will be somewhere in your programs, but if you just write Visual or VS Code and click, this IDE will open up, and what you do, either here open folder or open folder, Control K, Control O, and open a folder that you want to work on. For example, I have here in my desktop, I will open D folder, then I will go to practice and React. Let's go to React course and let's name this folder like starter. You can work anywhere really, open any folder. I just select this folder for clarity. Now here what we do, this step is very important. This is just like any other program that you have seen. You have file, edit, select, view, go, help, and you have option for saving files, for editing, cut, copy, paste, view, things like that. And if you want to know the version of your IDE, you come here and you will see Node version, Chrome version, these things, OS version. First of all, and this bar is very important because this is where your folder, like this is your folder, because I don't have anything right now, nothing's in my folder. I can expand it, I can get rid of it. Here we search for files and stuff. This is Git. After a while you might need Git. This is debugging and stuff, and this is for Docker, I guess. And here it is very important, please have like ES6 or ES7 React Redux like this installed. Just click on install here, I have it. This helps you with writing React. This is if you want to share your coding with someone else, you can code live together, so this can be helpful as well. But for now, what is very important for us is go to terminal, new terminal, or Control Shift and this sign, like the Arctic sign, which is before 1 on my keyboard. You just click on it. Here you see that you are exactly on the folder structure that you opened your VS Code in. For me, it's starter in React courses in React practice in default. What you do now, this is like the most important part, right? npx create React app. Now, what is npx? We said npm is for managing a node package. npx lets you like download and install node package on the fly without needing to download a global CLI or something like that. So we use this npx create a React app to create a React app, to have a React app installed for us, and we name it like, let's say, starter app. This name could be anything. I just named it starter app, but this part is very important. npx create React app and hit enter. It will take some time. But you will see that your starter app appears on the left in your files, and you have slowly like many folders. After a few minutes, the installation is over. Now you could have a problem during installation. Please let me know if so. We have two commands. One of them says cd starter app or npm start. We see the starter app here. We are on the starter folder, so we have to get into the starter app in order to work on our terminal on this starter app. How do we cd, which means change directory or change folder? So we cd into starter app, or just copy and paste this, works. Okay, so we made a mistake, so it's just better, copy and paste this. Okay, now we are on this folder. If you write npm start, your application should open somewhere on your browser. So it's npm start. and we see localhost 3000. Let's see if it opens anything. Yeah, we have this logo, which is Berlin or something. Edit something, learn React, which goes somewhere. But let's check our application. It says like you can open it always on this, and so long that this is running. But open startup. Now we have some more files and folders that we didn't see on when we were working on the code sandbox. Node modules. Node modules is simply npm downloading some packages to make our React app work. Where can we see these modules that we have installed? Here. Here we have the name of our app, which we can change. The version we can always change. This is not important. Dependencies. It has some dependencies like testing libraries and things like that. React scripts, web vitals. Scripts. Now this is very important. It says to start your application, to view it, you do react scripts.start or just npm start. To build it, react scripts.build or just npm build. To test it, react scripts.test. And don't do eject, that's not necessary. What we need is start and build. npm start and npm build. Now this is some ESLint configuration for errors and stuff. We don't need it right now. So this is package.json. read.md is where you explain how you build your application for people to see. Like for example, React course. This is shown at h1 because this is some sort of a marking document. So this is s3, like we built this starter React app, something like this. You can explain your step by step how your application works, but this is package and readme. We will talk about Git maybe in another day, but not today. Public is exactly where we had index.html. Now again we have index.html, but many other like things or files. Now this is your public.html. You can remove comments if you don't need them, but leave this file untouched. Let's change this. Let's see if our file is changing. Now let's take a look at it. It's React app. If you see on the bookmark, if we change it to React course, we see probably React course. Yes. So we know this is working, and just like Code Sandbox, we have this root, a div with root ID and empty div here. So this is almost the same as the Code Sandbox. Now, what is this favicon? Well, this favicon is like this. And if you don't need it, you probably better just remove them. This logo is again the React logo. You don't need them. Robots text and manifest.json. Just have index.html in your public, and that's all. Now src is a bit more like crowded in the create React app, but let's check it. We have app.css, which makes the app work, like the styles of the app. We have app. Always like, please remove everything and just write a fragment here. Remove logo. We no longer have logo. You could import CSS or just for now remove it, like we don't need it. Just remove this as well. Now we have app.test, just delete it. Index.css, just delete it. Index.js, now this is very important. Same as in the code sandbox, we have these files. We no longer have index.css. We don't need web vitals. We need React DOM, and app. Now React DOM, we said have a method to render our component app on our public HTML, which does exactly that through JavaScript. You don't need core web vitals. What you need is this piece of code and these three commands. React DOM has this render method. The first argument it takes is the component. The second argument is what you do with that component. You don't need to know much about that as well. Just delete the logo.sfg reports and save. Now let's talk about components. In React, almost everything is a component. We go to our source folder and we see two components. Both are written in JavaScript. That's why we see .js. Now we can create just about any component that we want with a JavaScript function. Like if we want const home and it renders returns this thing h2 which says home. Now how do we render this home? Well, right now we don't have any way to render this component on our HTML because our public HTML, which has the ID of root, our index.js only shows this app on our public HTML. So we have to have a way to put this home into our app. To do that, it's very easy. You have the name of your component. Just like any HTML tag, you write the name and self-close, or you can even just, not close it if you want. Now we have home. Let's create another component. Let's make this smaller. Let's create this time with a function nav return. This time we don't need braces, we just write navigation. Now this is a component. No matter how small it is, this is a component. Let's see now. And we see navigation. So let's try to make this smaller. Like this function nav, we make it an arrow function. Remember we said arrow function could condense your code, like we can remove curly braces, and if it is one line you can remove the return and go on that line. Now see if we make it navigation arrow. Let's see if it works. Navigation arrow. So as you see, a React component is nothing but a JavaScript function, conventionally written with capitalize it. So you can, if you know how to write functions, you know how to write a React component. Now we can't write like everything in our app.js. We have to have a way to write our components in other places. Actually, there are two roles which is very important for components. Components should only have one task, and a component should be named with a suitable name. Like this is a convention. So you have this component. Please don't try to put more and more code inside this app component, because this has one task, which is the home, being the home, the starter point of your application. So to create components, many developers create a folder inside src and name it components. let's say we want to show a navigation before our h1, like in our screen we need a navigation first, like many websites do. So inside components, create nav.js. This is a JavaScript file, so we can just, create a function or a component, const navigation, say, we say on return. Now let's make the fragment, and for now just create a UL and an li, say home, something like that. However, right now our app does not know anything about our components, so we have to find a way to introduce them together, which we will do shortly. To let our app know about our components, first a component should be accessible. How do we make a component accessible? Well, through imports we make any component accessible. It's through exports, sorry. So when we create a component or a React function, it is private. No one knows about this component. No one can touch it, no one can access it, no one can view it or edit it. When we export it, then others can import it and edit it, view it, or do anything with it. So let's learn how to export and import components. Well, we have two names for both exports and imports. For exports, we have named export and we have default export. So let's create another component as well. We call it footer.js because this is footer, and this is function footer and return footer. So first let's export this one so it can be accessible by the others. For this one we export it as a named export. So export const navigation. Now for named exports, for exports that we need the name, only this word and space is enough to export it. Now let's talk about default exports. For default exports we don't need much, we just need export default footer. Now when we export it by default, when we write export default anywhere in our component, you can import it just by any name, because you, for example, say export pizza from this page, from this component, from footer.js. Then the program looks inside footer.js and sees one export default and exports that. So when you default by export, so long that you import it from this page, it will give you this footer component. But now our components are accessible. One of them is named, one of them is default. Let's see how we rendered on our app.js. Well, to render it, we first need to import it. There are two names or the two ways to import components. First, we say import. If it's named, we use curly braces and write the name. For example, we have navigation. See, in our components, we have navigation. So here we write import navigation from where? Well, here in strings, you write, where are we here? We are we start from where we import in app.js. So we write /, and we have components. So we write, see, it even gives us suggestions, components. Then here we have two files. Of course, we need nav.js. So now we imported this component to app, but as a named import. When you have curly braces, it means it's a named import. Now, how to render it? As we said, you just like HTML tag, you do this navigation and okay. Let's see if we have navigation now. Well, we have home. Home is from navigation. as we see. And if you write something else like li, like about, we see about. But let navigation be on the top of our h1. What we do to make something on top, we just cut it and put it on top. That easy. So let's watch it. Now it's on top as it should be for navigation most of the time. Now, how do we do default imports? Well, we have one default import here, which is export default footer. What we do, we say import footer from, once again, slash component slash footer. We don't need now footer. And let's check if it works. Footer. Okay, let's see if it works. Now we have footer, and if we write something inside the footer, like cut copyright or something 2021, you will see it's rendered on our application. But we said default exports can be named like a pizza or anything. Since you have anything, since you import from footer and footer has default like export, you can name it just about anything. Let's just name it pizza and write pizza. And we see it doesn't change. And if we change it like inside our footer to pizza, we should see it reflected in our application, and of course it's reflected. Now, a couple of other things, like when you have a named export, you can have more than one like named exports. For example, const name heading, const export const heading returns like h1, this is a headline. Now we have this exported, name it as heading. Let's import it in our app. How do we import it? We don't come here and write import heading from, because we already have the line. What we do inside here, we can just like do heading. See? Because when you do named exports and open, this means we open an object, we can put any named export that we have in our nav in the components. So let's put heading here, like heading and we see this is a headline. So we can have multiple named exports and imports inside one file. Of course, we can have default export and named export side by side. Let's try it. Export const name equal to, since it's an arrow function, we will just do name is from. So let's see if we can do this, if we can have both export like default export or named export together. Let's come here and import name from components. Was it in nav? I think so. And let's write name here. Name is not exported from nav. Okay, we have it in our footer, so that was my mistake. Okay, let's see. And we see name is Frank. So this is all you need to know about like imports and exports and components. A component is a JavaScript function. It can be imported to be accessible, and it can be imported in two ways: imported with a name or imported by default. We can have multiple named imports or an export and default and named import. We can import it and name it import can be done through like curly braces with one or more like names. Default exports, we can name them anything we want in the application that we are importing from. React component can render other components with just like HTML tag, but self-closed. Of course, we can make it not self-closed, but just like, close it down like this. Now, it's not just our app that accepts like, other components. We can render this component now from our footer if you want. We just import it and write it down here just like this, and it will be like shown. However, for now, we will not discuss that. Let's talk about CSS. How do we like style this one? For example, if we want to, let's remove this because it creates this header. We want it to be red. Just like we explained in the code sandbox, you can do inline styling. For example, I say style, then two curly braces, color, and red, like this. Let's see if it works. Let's get back to our, and we see the color red. We can change the font size, font weight, anything we want here in style, but this is not very efficient because React components are meant to be small. They are not meant to be cluttered. So what we do usually, we either import a third-party library like Bootstrap or Tailwind or Chakra UI or Material UI. These are very, very famous libraries. Or we create our own style sheet and import it. Now let's talk about creating style sheet in React. Well, you can create style sheets anywhere really, but what usually people do, they just go to components, and for example, if they have footer.js, they create footer.css. Sometimes they push both of them into their own folder called footer. But say if we want like heading, we create that class. We say color green zone, font size, let's say 55 pixels. And what else do we have? Our color, let's say aqua, something like that. This doesn't work, not because we don't have a class name of heading, but because this CSS, like our component, let's create this and see if it works. It doesn't. Why? Because our component footer does not know about this footer.css. We have to import it. Of course, you don't need to export CSS because you don't need private CSS. So it's usually exportable, if that's a word, but we just import it. And we don't write any names here. No curly braces, no names, just import dot and footer.css. This is not like JavaScript where you don't need the .js, you do need .css. And if we take a look right now, we see that our styling is like, here. We will talk about styling much more, but for now, this is like, I think, okay,